Okay, hello everyone. Hello and welcome to the first class of Images of Reason, Scientific Method in Contemporary Culture. So to start, I'll read a little bit of a description from the course. In critical theory, post-structural thought, and critical cultural practices, technology, reason, and science have been labeled as the tools of both socio-political dominance and emancipation. This seminar asks how we might purchase scientific reason in the context of culture today, that is, without a comprehensive explanatory system of logic, nor a tenable proof from empirical relations that would offer symmetries between world and world, reality and referent. How do we judge the content of our expressions, explications, and communications manifested in culture? Can they be labeled as a form of scientific reason? Images that are claimed to explicate the structure of reality produce concepts, politics, and behaviors expressed in the lived world. These cultural expressions come in a range of poetic, representational, abstract, and sensory forms. But are they adequate to reason and the real? Is their critical value based in explicating their failure and a perennial dissatisfaction, their own capacity, in which their destiny is to expand the world as mythology? So Amanda, I'll introduce you a little bit. Amanda Beach is an artist and writer. Her work involves narratives of power, cause, and functionalism from philosophical theory, literature, and real political events, exploring how myths that seem necessary for an account of human agency are lived with, but can also be supplanted by a realist politics. Through entangling narratives of power and agency from philosophical theory, nourish narratives of TV shows like 24, CSI, The Hard Print, and the hard-boiled writing, of James Ellroy and real political events in her artwork in video, print, and sculpture manifest an argument for a propositional art that executes another form of force to surpass the notion that art simply reflects and reproduces the status quo. The work transverses the aesthetic and philosophical paradigms of institutional, individualistic, metaphysical, rational, and mythological authorities to propose a new realist politics of the artwork itself that can surpass the tragic consciousness and the ideal skepticism that has mutually championed and debilitated the value of art in modern and contemporary culture. In this hard critique of liberal and neoliberal cultural politics, her work examines and produces the condition of language as a force and the force of language with the weight of a commitment to a future. With joy, I began my first.
You get that one for me.
So,
you don't have to do that again.
Please take it over from here.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction. I would love it if we could all hear, our participants, and I would love to hear about what you do, a bit about your background, and I also would love to know how familiar you are with this format, like what other classes, if any, or any history you've got with the New Center. And that would be super helpful for me as well, because as you can probably tell, this is my first, foray into Zoom teaching. So I'm just reading across my top of my screen and I can see Jessie there. Would you mind saying something, please?
Yes, that's me, right?
Yes.
Okay, who knows? There might be others. Yeah, so this is my third New Center seminar. I've started this October as a recipient of a partial scholarship for the certificate program. And before I took the seminar on narratology by Klaus Speidel and the seminar on computation and the real by Anil Bawa Salvia. I hope I at least kind of pronounced this correctly. And I'm a research associate with a computer science research group in Berlin. And my background is not in computer science though, formally. So I come more from a design and critical theory background. And I'm currently doing a PhD in philosophy of technology at the University of Twente.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess I should just check that the people I can see at the top are, do you think there are other people who are here that I cannot see in the pictures?
So everyone, there's a little scroll button. So there's
Oh,
people, but
I
if
think
it's the same one.
I think you can also go into the gallery view on top, and then you can see everybody. I think.
oh, that would be amazing.
If that's the same interface for you.
View meeting. I'm sorry to hold everyone up here. Gallery view. Oh, wow, that's super cool. Great. Thank you for telling me about that. And then I'll just move across, and I'm sorry to like call upon people like this, but I think we're going to have to be doing this quite a lot because I'm really keen throughout the whole process to have everyone talking together. So Aladdin.
Yes.
Hello.
Well, hi. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so that's my second class at the new center. I also started in October, like Jessie, by having like a partial scholarship to doing the certificate program. The first class I followed was narratology. I do have a background in art and in visual anthropology. So I did a BA in photography and visual art and a master in visual anthropology in Berlin. I'm now living in Switzerland and also partly in London. I do work as an artist and as a, I would say like, researcher in anthropology. So I do lead a research project that investigates the relationship between humans and bees. And it's why I was also really interesting to follow the class, because I guess those questions often occur in my practice when I use art as a practice to convey anthropological research topics.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then I'm just moving across to Carl.
There we go. Hi, nice to meet you. Yeah, my name is Carl. I'm original from Sweden, although now I'm doing my PhD at Newcastle University in geography.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I'm also a certificate student here. Started in October, like. But,
don't worry. Thank you.
Yeah, who else was it? Jessie. And I'm taking this course and the panoptic view of art history, and also Restless seminar. I don't remember the name. The Man Who Knew Nothing. Yeah, stuff like that. So yeah, nice to meet you. I look forward to this. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. And I can't see very well. Yami, is it?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Great. I'm Guilherme. This is actually my first class. I also got one of the scholarships 2 months ago. My background is in music. I'm a music producer and composer. I'm taking a master's where my research project explores forms of expression using AI and its cultural and ontological implications. I'm mostly writing about connecting the dots to AI and technological determinism, and also pretty much to the culture industry. So it's actually perfect that the first week I had to do with this. And also connecting the dots to structuralism and rhizomes and how everything kind of relates to everything that preceded it, and how neural networks generate content like this, and also how we generate content like this. So yeah, that's mostly what I'm into.
We'll be talking about that a lot today, I think.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and I'll explain more soon, but yeah, thank you very much. Eric.
Nice to meet you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric. I also got a partial scholarship as certificate student like this October. This is my second seminar. My first seminar was with Danielle on the CCIU and the Carrière pour l'analyse. And I'm studying sociology and philosophy. I'm still in my bachelor in Germany, in Bielefeld. And yeah, so I'm like a heavy theoretical background on this stuff, not so much the artistic and aesthetic, but I'm really interested in the relation between, okay, like abstract rationality and its relation to aesthetic objects and the possibility of its representation. And yeah, I'm also coming from this left accelerationist this course where this is about design and navigation, and this plays a heavy role. And yeah, so that's mine. Hi.
Super, thank you. And then I have Yasemin.
Oh yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm Yasemin. I'm from Iran. I did my BA in photography back in Iran. Now I live in London. I'm doing my MFA in fine art at Goldsmiths.
Okay.
And within New Center, I did like Reza's courses last term, and I'm doing the other one this term. And yeah, I work with like fictional narratives, and I'm also like interested in this other capacity within art to like as a platform to do other sort of like things, or as a mediation form. So I'm interested in these things.
Great. I have fond memories because I used to teach on the MFA at Goldsmiths.
Okay, cool. Like when did you teach?
Sorry?
When did you teach? Was it like?
Oh my God. I left in like 2012, I think.
Okay. Cool,
yeah, but I used to run the Monday night theory lectures with
oh,
Suhail.
okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, good.
Very
then,
interesting.
Thank you. Jordan.
Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan, and I'm coming from Saskatoon, Canada. I've taken two other New Center courses. One I'm currently taking on Saturdays. It's a queer theory course with Ben Miller. And in the past, I think a few years ago, I took a course called The Anarchy of Objects with Levi Bryant. I've completed an MA in sociology, and my interests usually center on French postmodern philosophy, actor network theory, and object-oriented ontology kind of more generally, and memory studies. And currently I'm taking courses at the New Center or through the New Center in order to kind of keep me sharp in between my MA and PhD.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much. And I once nearly went to Saskatoon because I was showing at the Reme Modern.
Yes, I remember seeing your work, at least digital form of it.
Yeah,
The Reme, yeah.
I invented a fake game for them.
Yeah, I've seen, I unfortunately have never played the game, but I've seen videos of people playing it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then Sasha.
Yeah, hey. So I'm currently in Moscow, and I'm like several other people here. I'm on. Can you hear me? I'm on a certificate program, and I received a partial scholarship. Basically, I finished my MA in contemporary theory this October, and so like mostly my reasons are in like broadly saying feminist theory. So I like right now it's my fourth seminar. I took one with Daniel. I'm currently taking queerness and labor, and I took one on post-colonial theory and cinematic fantasy.
Wow, that sounds great. Thank you very much. And then we've got Sebastian.
Hey, my name is Sebastian. I got a partial scholarship as well. So I just started the certificate program a month ago. And I'm doing queerness and labor, the seminar with Ben Miller, as well as this one called Towards the Panoptic View of Art History, which is kind of like anthology of different art historians. It's kind of like every week it changes. So it's not as centralized, so to say, as the other seminars. And I'm currently finishing my master's degree in curatorial and critical studies at the Städelschule in Frankfurt in Germany. But my background is art history and visual communication. And I guess I was attracted to this seminar because of how certain aspects of reason have been so thoroughly problematized, of course, to various degrees, in various new materialist schools of philosophy, as well as in post-colonial critiques and diasporic critiques. So it's for me interesting to think about such issues, especially in relation to aesthetics and culture.
Yeah, I agree. And I do hope that we can all, I mean, you've all already, a lot of you have already brought some of the stakes of these discussions, even in your introductions. And I do hope that you find the space in these meetings to bring in your own backgrounds and your own positions, and we can like have a really useful debate around these kind of topics, these moral and political and ethical kind of strands that feed into the structures of the real, if you like, via rationalism. So thank you for that. And I have next on my list here, Federico.
Yes, can you hear me, Amanda?
Yes.
Okay, hi, nice to meet you. I have a background in arts. I have an undergrad in plastic arts and visual arts. I'm currently in Colombia. And well, I actually got fed up with the arts world. I'm currently trying to train myself to get into philosophy. So I'm doing the master's degree right now, and I'm also with the partial scholarship right now with the New Center. This is actually my third seminar. The first one, also with Eric and Sasha, was with Daniel Sasilotto about the coherence pour l'analyse. And I'm also seeing the seminar with Reza right now that started this Wednesday. And well, my interests right now are like making a critique of or trying to reassess the machinic in Deleuze and Guattari through the anti-Oedipus. Try to rearrange it in a rationalist way. So I'm trying to get more into the neo-rationalist and analytic traditions and try to do like a sort of critique of that. And I actually was surprised to see Lyotard here in your class. I actually love that book of Libidal Economy. I like it a lot, so I'm quite excited.
Great, smashing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then on my list here, I've got Lenka.
Hi, I'm sorry, I have a weak connection, so I'm not using the camera. I started with New Center a year ago, and then I had 1 semester break, and this semester I'm taking the class with Reza, and I took the one on computation. And I'm doing my PhD in London on Deleuze and scientific pluralism. So it's relevant for me to think of differences between art and science. And with Deleuze, I do it mainly by following different relationship they have to time and infinite speed. And I did my master's actually on, it was comparative study of Deleuze and Adorno, and my bachelor's was in aesthetics, so I was always interested in.
Super. That sounds fascinating. Thank you. And I just want to make sure that everyone has spoken and they've all introduced themselves that are present, so I haven't missed out anyone. Okay. So one of the things that I want to just go through before we like kick off properly is just to maybe explain equally the syllabus and my methodology. And my methodology for this setup is aspirational, right? Because as I've said before, this is not a format that I'm currently used to in terms of like a pedagogical environment. So what I'll say is that normally the environment that I would normally teach in is highly discursive, and it does not involve someone standing up and telling you or giving information or offering knowledge as a kind of, let's say, traditional hierarchical notion of delivery. And instead, I'm very keen on hearing from everybody in the group and everybody participating in some way to the best of their ability. Some people participation might mean listening a lot and not saying too much. So everyone has different ways of joining in, but I hope that by the time we get to hopefully next week, even, we can all kind of think about sharing this space, which means being respectful of each other's ideas, but also being a bit selfish too, like bringing our own ideas and thinking, well, why am I here? What is this doing for me? How is this impacting upon my motivations for why I'm here? And I think that, you know, we can ask ourselves that when we're dealing with these texts and looking at the discussion. So I just want to remind everyone that I am not a trained philosopher. I do not use philosophical methodology. When we're discussing text, for example, and this is when I sound all kind of tough and mean, but this is it, and then it'll break out later. But I really don't want to know about exterior reading or outside information. So if we've got text, I'd rather it be that we just look at the text that we're reading and concentrate on them, and bring in knowledge from inside the text for each other to consider. And I'm sure many of you, I mean, we've all got such vastly different skills, diverse forms of knowledge. And that means it's sometimes difficult to work across each other's disciplines and have a full knowledge of everyone else's backgrounds. So I think that if we can stay with the format of just trying to look at the material that we've got, that would be super helpful, because it creates a more open atmosphere because we've all read the same stuff together. So if that's okay, that I think would be really great. And as I say, I'm not a trained philosopher, so I don't use philosophical methodology. I don't have a strict tradition of if you've read this, you need to have read that before it in order to understand the full kind of conditions of a thought. As an artist, I'm very undisciplined, let's say. And I think part of being an artist is that you construct your own methodologies. And you have these can still be rigorous and analytical, but also often creative and innovative. And you have to kind of defend them in very particular ways, because often you don't have traditional grounds to defend the production of these new systems of thought and production. So I know this happens in other disciplines too. I'm not just saying this is an exceptional quality of art at all, but I think it does make a clear difference between, say, the way I might think through material and the way, like, colleagues and friends of mine, like Reza, for example, or other people who've been trained in different discourses and disciplines might operate. So I just want you to bear that in mind and have some patience with that. And also to think about testing yourself and like trying out new stuff as well, and we'll see how we get on together. So I want to consider it as a shared environment where we can actually not only talk about the material, but if you have critiques or feedback on the actual methodological premise, we can also discuss that too. I'm very open to doing that, and we can move in different shapes and forms as we go forward. So one of the ways to like engage the kind of this methodology is to try and put together texts and cultural artifacts each week that might not immediately have such a clear relation. They might not be so polemical in the sense that they might not be clear oppositional texts. They might not be good bedfellows either. And I wanted us to like deal with sets of thoughts from different times and locations and perspectives that we could really try and map and use to like bridge and traverse possible new innovations in our own thinking. So rather than think, well, what are these texts going to teach us? I mean, well, we can do that, of course, but rather than just think that, we can also think, what is it to produce, say, traversals or epistemological bridges that require our own innovation and the production of new methods in our own creativity to kind of see how these texts are operating together across time, but also in contemporary space today, in the space of the political. So that's something I had in mind, and that's kind of an explanation of why I chose like maybe a film, an artifact, an artwork, a text from say Frankfurt School type stuff, but also putting something together with analytical philosophy or determinist philosophy with continental. And let's just like forget the traditional genres of continental and analytical and just think about people's thoughts and ideas. I think it's something that I'm very interested in. I wouldn't consider myself to be allied to one camp or another. I never have been. I've always read across continental and analytical myself, and I think there's a lot to do there. So again, that's another kind of tradition that I don't want to follow, like separating things into genres, camps, and disciplines. I'm not very discourse oriented. So that's another reason why we're bringing this stuff together in these seminars. We only have 4 meetings. So I'm hoping that we can do a lot in those meetings. And I'm really keen to, again, to hear from you and your knowledge and your experiences. What I'm going to do today, having said all of that about how much participation I desire, today I'm going to set up a lecture, but it's going to be the only one I'm going to do. After today, I think it would be wonderful for each of us, each of you guys, to do some reading and to do responses and presentations. And then we can like look at the work from your own perspectives, but also bring it into a common, let's say, discursive space where we can kind of extrapolate and work out what consensus we have on these texts, if any. So I think that that's what we'll do every week after this week, because I think we should settle in this week. So I'm going to like talk through some of the kind of mobilizations for doing this discussion in the first place. I'm going to tell you about that. I'm going to tell you what I mean by some terms I'm using. And I'm also going to like do a preemptive apology, because I had no idea what your backgrounds were until now. So I apologize ahead of time if when I say things you go, well, yeah, I know all this. This is so obvious. This is so boring. I've read it all. I know it all. But I also apologize if I move through too quickly things that aren't familiar to you. It's always the case when we're speaking across disciplines and different interests. So it's a kind of risk for everybody to kind of try and appeal to the public of as diverse as you guys are. So what I want to do is to offer an opportunity that if you think how I'm speaking or working with you needs accelerating or needs intensifying in any way, I want you to take responsibility for that and bring complexities to the conversation at the level you seek. That's what I can ask from you guys. So I know where we're okay, where our happy medium is in the group. So I'm going to go in at a certain level that I find more traditional to like grad level. Some of you are much beyond that, but let's see where we go, because we are sharing, like I say, new forms of knowledge in many ways. So if you want to say, let's go further, we can certainly do that. If we want to slow it down, we can do that too. So how do I get you to intervene, ask questions, interrupt when I'm talking? I want you to do this. I have like a PowerPoint today. I'm going to do a share screen and talk through it. But if I don't get through the PowerPoint, that doesn't bother me. Like, I don't really care about that. If you want to interrupt me and bring in some knowledge of your own, I would love that too. the way Lauren was telling me is that you can unmute your little mute button as a symbol, as a signal to me. And then hopefully I can see that. I'm also happy if you unmute and just shout and say, it's Eric, I want to say something right now. Please do it. Be rude, right? Because we haven't got much opportunity to, like, you know, passivity doesn't pay off.
The funny thing is, last seminar I interrupted Daniel all the time. Like, this fits so
Good, good. So go for it. And if I find, like, you know, at some point, some people might talk a lot and then exclude other people. And as my job as chairperson, I'm going to have to say, look, hey, do you mind is there anyone else? And I might have to call upon people. And you know what? I was saying to Lauren before, I have never called upon anyone in a class in my life because I do respect people's thoughtful time, right? Not everyone can engage in the same way, and it's not fair to ask that of people. But because I'm mindful that people might want to speak but might feel so polite that they won't intervene, I might call upon people and just say, hey, do you feel like you want to say something? How are you doing right now? And if you don't want to say anything, you say, no, I'm okay. That's fine too, right? So I just want to try and make sure that we can create this environment where we are heading into some argumentative territory and feeling happy about that. So that's my aim. So next week, I really am I'm not gonna introduce the text. I don't want to do that. I want to just see how it flows. And if I need to facilitate a bit, I will. And we're gonna, like, allow people to have a voice. So before I begin today, what I'd love to do, if you're okay with this, is to, like, allocate some people to weeks. And if you've got issues with that later on, you could email me and maybe we could work something else out. But for now, if it's okay, I would love to, like, ask you guys, like, just to read through the list of the texts and stuff we're looking at. And if any of you go, I'll do it, I'll put your name down and we can share it as a document and like a little contract. And then we know what's happening for the next 4 weeks. So if that's okay? Thank you, thank you. So what I'm going to do is just say, like, well, next week, we've got the Badiou. By the way, we're all reading everything, right? We're all looking at everything, even if we're not, like, leading the response or whatever. I'm looking at it all, you're looking at it all. It's like a kind of promise to each other, because that's the only way we're going to make this work. I have to say, when I'm teaching at CalArts, if someone hasn't read the text, I normally let them leave the class and then wait till they've read it and we wait for them. I think it's really important that we read together. So does anybody want to do a presentation, like a 10-minute thing on the Badiou?
I could do it.
Thank you. Right, I've got your name. So
Yeah,
I've got you down for 10 minutes.
I have the same initial, so.
Brilliant. And does anybody want to look at the free will in the Gruenbaum?
I think I could try doing the Gruenbaum. It's Sasha. It's all right. I could turn my webcam off.
Okay, thank you, Sasha. And just let me remind you that often in the syllabus, there's actual page numbers. I've like not asked for us to read lots and lots, but I'd rather read in a concentrated way and like be more analytical around and read kind of slowly. Okay. So yeah, just check out the word count kind of pages. That would be great. So if we could have like around 10 minutes on that. And then thank you so much. And does anybody want to look at this Naumann piece?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind. I can do that. It's Carl.
Carl, thank you.
Sure.
Great. So just do, you know, a couple of minutes, whatever you want to do on the Naumann, because, you know, it's not like you have to go off. I'm not asking you to go off and do loads of research on it, but it'd be great to.
Yeah, but I'll look into it a little bit.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. And then what we could also do is just set up people who might want to respond to you guys. Does anybody want to respond to Aladdin's Badiou?
I can do that.
Cool, thanks. I mean, it's just like an opening foray, just in terms of like the first response. I mean, you might just have questions even. And then the Gruenbaum. Does anybody want to respond to Sasha?
I can, Jordan.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.
And then the Naumann with Carl.
Sorry, by the way, I might be seeing the wrong syllabus because I can't see Naumann on the list of the one that I'm having. Is
Same
that
here. It's on week 3.
Oh yeah. It's
number 3 of week 3.
Just because of.
Oh shit! Sorry. So when we do the Naumann, you're doing that on the week of the Naumann.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Fair. Or I can do the thing next week. It doesn't matter. Depends on what anyone else wants. It's yeah.
Okay.
I'm fine with either.
Sorry about that. Thanks for checking in on that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool.
Which one is it though now?
Yeah. What did we decide on?
There's
am I doing the Naumann or the text for next week?
Next week we're doing. I'm just gonna go on the thing, on the syllabus. Just one sec. That I've got. Next week we have. It's the Kasuth. We have Kasuth. So it's Alain Badiou, Adolphe Gruenbaum, and Joseph Kasuth. So it's not Naumann, it's Kasuth. So
yeah.
Could you do that?
Yes, I can do that too. It's fine. Yes, as long as we sort of decide on something, that's fine.
That's great. Thank you very much. And if we got someone just to like kick off another response to that, that would be great. Yes, I mean, can I ask you to say something about the Kasuth as well?
I kind of like try to, but the reason that I didn't volunteer is that probably I won't be able to make it next week. So I'm still like, but maybe I can do it. If I attend, I can do that.
Okay, well, let's just
try
I
will let you know like later in the week.
Yeah,
that's
thank
okay.
you so much. Okay, and then let's move on to the week after, and I'm just like making sure we're okay.
I would like to do the Althusser piece, if that's okay.
Yeah, who's that's talking? Because I know.
Yeah, Eric here.
Eric, brilliant.
Yes. So just a short 10-minute presentation. Okay, is PowerPoint obligatory or is it totally free? Oh, okay, cool. Okay.
Anything you like.
Okay.
You know, if one of you wants to respond to a text with like 5 minutes of talk, and then I need to show some YouTube clips because that's what it made me think of. You could do that too. Any format is fine for me. And who wants to respond to Eric's presentation on the Althusser?
I would like to do that.
So who's saying that?
Lenka, sorry.
Lenka, thank you very much. Got you. And then I'm wondering who would like to do a little response to the movie.
Can I do that?
Yeah, who's that?
Sebastian. Is it the He Who Gets Slapped movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. I would like to do that.
Okay, cool. And could you also do the Duchamp as well?
Yeah, I can do both of them together.
That would be great because they're really connected.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you very much. And just can I put someone down as like a respondent, like a little who can have like start.
I could do it, I guess.
Thank you.
Are we still having presentations about the culture industry?
If we had presentations about that, what we might do, if we've got time today, we could ask people to do that. Does anybody want to do that?
If we may have time today, if that's okay, and if I could drop the Althusser for it, I would like to say something about the Lyotard text, if that's okay. Every political economy is libidinal.
Yeah.
Like just some short minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think what I'd like to do today is, when I've got through like the basics, first of all, like I say, I'd love it. You could even interrupt me and have your comments. But if we get to the end of today and we haven't got to that, we could even start next week with a kind of recap and some commentary on it.
Okay.
So if you feel that you're not getting to it today for any reason, we could like catch up on that next week first.
Okay, so maybe we can decide at the end of the course and see how we got through the material. And okay.
Definitely. And do remind me about that at the end.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So we've got, and the same goes for the culture industry. If anybody wanted to speak to that in any depth, you're very welcome to do it at the beginning of next week or within this session. And then
Amanda, may I have the clown torture by Bruce Nauman for a presentation?
Who is this speaking? Sorry.
This is Federico.
Federico, great. Great. And I think the clown torture also is connected to the film.
Okay.
So do bear that in mind. The film He Who Is Slapped is really strange.
Okay.
But I think it kind of connects to these artworks, and we'll work that out. Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you. And then the last week we have the text by Danielle Macbeth.
I'd be up for that, talking about that one.
Who's that, sorry?
Yes, sir.
Jessie. Thank you. Does anybody want to respond to the Macbeth and Jessie's comments?
Sure, I can do that. It's Carl.
Carl, thank you very much. And then we have the second Gruenbaum, which is kind of different.
Oh, I can give a presentation on that one. Jordan.
Jordan, thank you. And then we've got one final slot for a little response to Jordan. So anyone can
may I respond? Once again, Federico.
Federico, super. Thank you so much, everybody, for your volunteering and participation. I think it's going to be great. So I'm going to make sure that we've got that written up, and I'll make sure it's accessible. And if you're unhappy or you want to decide to add your name to the list, which will be hopefully an interactive document, you can also say, well, actually, I want to respond to that too in a more, because I expect everyone to talk and respond, but these are more formal structures just to kind of allow us to diversify, right? They're the grounds. Okay, then. And I'll just say, is there anything that you guys want to ask me or tell me before we kind of begin? Because if not, then I'll start sharing my screen and like introduce the kind of parameters of this course. Okay, smashing. So I am gonna like try and go to my PowerPoint now and share screen. And like I say, if there's anything you want to just go for it, shout. And I am going to share my screen for the first time, so bear with me. Is that working, guys?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Yes?
Yep.
All right, brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to move through this kind of set of slides. And as I say, if we don't get to the end, I'm not going to be so concerned. This is more like I wanted just to try and explain to you my motivations for kind of dealing with the subject matter. Again, as a reminder, this is not a philosophy, exclusively a philosophy course. This is an attempt to produce some kind of traversal across many different types of thought and discipline. And we're going to be looking at a little bit of technology, film, art, and also, like, of course, we have the culture industry stuff and the Lyotard to think about, as well as curation here. So what I'm going to look at first is this kind of Brunelleschi, and I'm sure some of you know about this already. So I wanted just to remind us that, like, about this intersection between the mathematics, geometry and reason, and the images, the history of image production in space in like Renaissance thinking. And I wanted to think about, as a kind of background to what we'll be discussing, how linear perspective, this idea of producing a vision of actualized reality, how it became the central aesthetic of the Renaissance world, and it also influenced modern science. And in the Renaissance, we see the use of various apparatus and mechanisms for image production. One sought to present reality by means of reason. So reason gives art a machine or a machinic kind of process for the production of images that could claim the real via mathematics, but also ends up giving art a rational aesthetic. And I wanted just to kind of highlight, like, what this aesthetic produced from reason was how it manifested. So the assertion of this claim to the real is not tested or valued through its visual verisimilitude, which is having the ability to look like the thing that it was depicting, but by a kind of verisimilitude that gave the image a sense of obtaining a place in real life. So images actually occupy space as like objects, as manifest things in the world that we take seriously and have to negotiate, especially when we think about like space and architectural formations, and how painting at that time was pretty obsessed with trompe-l'oeil, the kind of fascination with thinking about depth through two-dimensional production. So the limitations of two dimensions were kind of tested in the illusions of three dimensions. So this was pertinent to like Renaissance developments in perspective, and the image becomes a kind of oblique manifestation of the real, and at the same time an image experience, a kind of form of mirror. So this produced a strange geometric space in paintings, but also images that conjured believable space, like believable three-dimensional space that was actually, of course, 2D. So in these cases, we've got this act of representing for Euclidean geometry and optics, and it's understood to be like a form of mathematical mirroring. And I'm just trying to move this stuff so I can see my kind of notes. So just as when we're looking in a mirror, we see a flat representation, but we can perceive three dimensions, we have this same kind of strange configuration in a lot of Euclidean influenced geometric perspectival work in the Renaissance. So in a way, we can like say that out of what was claimed as the processes of reason and the mechanization of image production, we actually end up with quite spectacular, theatrical, often illusory, strange kind of image productions that seem like warped or unreal. So this kind of interface between reason and these images that seem different becomes something really important when we think later about like Lyotard's work with artworks. And I think we can kind of hold these kind of forms of strangeness that reason produces for us in view kind of constantly in this kind of set of discussions. And this kind of makes us think that, you know, we need to be really careful about when we use the term realism, because when I'm using the idea of realism, I'm talking about like philosophical realism. I'm talking about the production of a thinking of a mind independent reality, an objective reality that is not correlative to subjective psychologisms. Whereas often when we think about realism in art, we have this tendency, of course, to think about this idea of verisimilitude, this idea of the copy, the kind of visual comparative adequacy between an image that we say paint or render and reality as lived. So I think we need to be really careful and be very clear when we're talking about the difference between what we might call social realism or empirical realism and philosophical realism. And because we can easily collapse the two. And we'll see that often and we'll see this in many of our discussions where we can think about, for example, the way Lyotard's project Les Immatérieux is a kind of terraforming of the real. And I'm going to talk about that in a little while. And also the kind of promise of that and the limitations of that, how the real becomes adequate in the image form. What adequacy are we talking about? How is reason used to grasp the real, this mind independent reality? And how do images actually produce and bring this to us without this idea of it being a correlative condition, like it's not a map, nor is it a kind of a mirror exactly, but it has, like I've just said here, an aspect of a mirror function, but it is another image in itself. Another world is produced, which brings us to the kind of way in which we might think about art as a constructivist operation for the production of difference, possible worlds, other worlds, and let's think about the aleatory in itself, in the sense of how art operates with these ideas of the real. And one of the points of the real, of course, is the future, a place we do not have access to. So these are all kind of conditions I think we need to be like mindful of and careful about in our language, and be, when we're talking to each other as we go through, we can like be very clear about what we mean by reality, what we mean by realism, and in all its different forms. So I've just mentioned a couple, and there's many. It's like talking about democracy. You can never have like a good conversation about democracy. You always need a prefix to speak about the political with democracy. So I'm going to kind of hopefully move on to my next slide. There we go. I just want to talk about and I think, you know, some of you have brought this up already, the historic and political difficulties with talking about reason and how we might associate that with issues around deeply problematic philosophies of the Enlightenment that have, of course, been supported in imperialism, massive inequalities in the social at a global level, and colonialism. And in many ways, you can say, well, it seems really clear why art has often claimed to be anathema to reason, and to live at the edges or even occupy the space beyond reason. And this is not only, we could say, a political decision to move against or antagonize what reason represents in the political, as I've just described. But it also comes from this idea of a kind of reading of the aesthetic, a reading of phenomenological experience as being, and a reading of a kind of comprehension of sense data as being something that is irreducible to reason. So these are kind of at least two reasons to see art in this way, to see art as a redemptive space for the political by dint of it being beyond reason, but also it can be beyond reason, and it will always already be as such because sense data is irreducible to explication and explanation in rational formats of language. So these are just kind of two ideas that we can think of as why we have these traditions.
And I'm going to interrupt you here if you don't mind. It's Carl. Yes,
yeah.
I'm going to be the first to do this sort of sacrilegious thing. But yeah, I think if we are going to qualify the real, I think we also need to qualify reason quite a bit, perhaps to the same extent. And I think if you could just say a word about what you sort of mean by reason in this context, I take it to be sort of close to sort of, you know, early modern sort of scientific rationality and sort of, and also philosophy in the kinds of rationalism. But just if you would mind to sort of elaborate a little bit.
Well, actually, I agree with your diagnosis on that. I mean, that is what I'm referring to. And I kind of will be advancing questions around the work of epistemology here. I want to think about the role of epistemological work, and I'm going to make, as we move through this, core distinctions between epistemology, transcendental reason, but also the idea of critique and immanent critique. So I want us all to be able to discuss these different attitudes to what it is to reason. And also when we think about reason as a pathology of the human as well. So today I want to think about all these things, and I think Lyotard is really helpful to do that. Especially because Lyotard advances this critique of critique. Like a kind of opposition to critique that comes out of a kind of pathology of critique itself. So I think we do need to be really careful again about what, and then we'll be like, well, what do we mean by critique? So I think we can parse out these definitions, and I think the best way often to do that is through examples of people's work and how we see critical work in operation, where we see it's exemplified in people's work. So I think that's the way I'd like to deal with this in terms of entertaining the possibilities of different formats of and for reason to work. If that's okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, cool. And do it, like I say, continue to interrupt. So yeah, I think that, you know, one of these things about art being on the side of unreason, let's say, has been also about how art having no cause, like I've often thought of being ex nihilo. It's often thought of having no empirical need to exist, that art has not been given a kind of a necessary space. And that's still, you know, often debated in the art world today, continually, like, what's it for? Like the question of art's functionalism. And of course, in the past, we've had many theories which say, well, the reason art is so useful is because it has no use. You know, we see that in Kant, we see it in Heidegger, we see it like in discourses on, you know, post-68 failure and punk. So in kind of forms of active nihilism and so on. And I think we can like try and touch upon a lot of these questions as well as we go through this. but also I think that the idea of art having no reason or no cause, if you like, the level of project, in terms of, like, when I say project, I'm referring to like an emancipatory project, which we inherit from the Enlightenment. I think part of that is very problematic, because it really situates art on the side of theology, and it kind of returns art to its early function as being, well, because art is irreducible to reason, or ordinary explanations within ordinary language discourses, it has this capacity to exist in the aleatory. And often when we think about the aleatory, the first space of that is a religious space, a theological space. So I think it's fascinating that the arguments for art to be political, when the artwork is seen to be said to be uncaused, open, ambiguous, aporetic, in order to hold the space of politics open for its future possibilities, very much coincide with its dogmatic role as a theological space. And when it was often seen to do that, of course, it's actually the opium of the masses. You know, it's something that controls society. It's a form of social realism, not philosophical realism. So what I'm trying to say here is that art is often, in the name of philosophical realism, slid very quickly into forms of social realist rhetorical propaganda in the name of certain forms of dogmatic theological conditions. So I think this is, again, another thing that we need to kind of consider in terms of the aspirations and the consequences of trying to produce a kind of art in the name of scientific realism.
Amanda?
Yeah.
One question. I didn't really quite understand the parallel between, okay, art in the name of politics and art in the name of theology.
Okay.
Yes, what exactly was the parallel structure there? I don't have any education in art history, so that's also, but yeah.
I can certainly explain that, and I'll do it now very quickly, but the whole talk today, I think we can really go into that, but also I think it's going to come up again. It certainly comes up in the Althusser in a few weeks.
Okay, so, thanks.
But for sure, I think that in many ways, the tradition that we have for art to occupy the space of the open, I mean, Umberto Eco famously wrote a text called The Open Work. We have a tradition in critical theory of artists and artworks interested in immanent critique to say that the idea of the artwork is to hold the space of the political open for any possible future. Not because the fear is that if one is to propose or construct a future that is thought or considered as an actual possibility, the worry is that the artwork would risk being seen as totalitarian or imperialist or didactic. And Alain Badiou's text speaks to this next week as well. And we'll deal with this more fully then as we move through. So in the art world, there's been a huge tradition of a resistance to didacticism, a resistance to propaganda, a resistance to decisive, deterministic types of operations, and instead to make artworks that actually claim an openness to all forms of interpretation. Like, you can say anything about the work. That is the claim, whether you like it or not. That is the claim in many artworks. And what I'm saying is this gesture towards the open and the non-specific has this parallel to this gesture towards the transcendental in forms of religion, the idea that the artwork is reaching towards another space.
Sorry, can I maybe just ask how this idea of the autonomy of art somehow plays into this, and how also autonomy of the artwork somehow also historically served as an ideology for it to preserve such premise for openness or indeterminacy as well?
Yeah, I think
I mean, it's a big question, but
it is, but I also think that the other side of this is the claim to de-automatize artwork. So we have this idea that artwork, we have the tradition of autonomous work, but then we have this position of negative autonomy in early modernity, which manifests fully in conceptual art in the 60s and 70s, which conflated art with life.
Mm-hmm.
So the de-sublimation, the de-automatization, these kind of self-destruction, the purposive self-destruction of the conditions of autonomy, of course, reinforced autonomy, but at the level of myth.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of autonomy wasn't didn't disappear, and instead we get involved in a kind of formats of like crisis and regressive ontology, where art just maintains its autonomy through talking about its desire to get rid of its autonomy. And we see that in Kossuth. We will be looking at this as we go forward as well. But I do think that there's certain, there are parallels between the claims between art's ability to be different, to be beyond reason, beyond the space of reason, and this idea of a kind of theological space that also harnesses this idea of the ecstatic, the future to come, and of course, many artworks, of course, would claim to be, of course, not theological, but that these kind of parallels that I think we could think about, where we can see different naive forms of dogmatism going on in the work, despite and because of art's claim to be the opposite, to be the freeing emancipatory agent, to free us from decision in this field of the indeterminate. So, I mean, I'm being kind of quick now, but we will be coming back to this in much more detail. And we do here, as I've said, you know, we've got images of like famous rappers, as we have here, like the myth of the artist's genius, all play into these kind of formats, like the idea of the enigmatic soul of the artist, are coming back into culture more than ever through these ideas of kind of return of the sublime in commodity aesthetics, which manifest like a different forms of verticality through pop culture, vertical forms of power that are often seen to be the opposite to the open field of the political. So these kind of re-enter in different formats through commodity aesthetics, something that like Adorno is speaking to already in the last century. So let's kind of move on a bit. We got a lot to go through. So I just want to like recap and say like, why was reason opposed? Well, we can say very clearly to resist the authoritative dominance of the norm, to literally, you know, to resist the literal and visible formats of governmental power that were seen to be oppressive and producing huge inequalities at the level of like life, at the level of the local. And this idea of how reason ordered people as if they were objects. And we see that I say objects because I'm talking very much about industrial mechanization and the factory at this point, especially in relation to the texts of Adorno and Lyotard. But of course, we could talk now in more contemporary culture about the idea of the human as being reducible to very much to data, to numbers, and quantified in these ways through contemporary technologies. So I think, you know, whether we're talking about Fordism or post-Fordism, we can kind of still find these common anxieties about what reason does through the conditions of capital, whether it's liberal or neoliberal capital. We also have, you know, why oppose reason? And just to recap, we have it because opposing reason can equate art with deeper freedoms, apparently, a subjective will, at the level of private spiritual beliefs in like liberalism, which of course secularized religion. And also, as I've said, at the level of a politics to come. So if art is opposed to reason, whilst it does not project the future and says the future ought to be like this, or we ought to be thinking in this way for a future, instead it's leaving the future as just an open possibility in itself, which is said to allocate the idea of freedom in a kind of ecstatic coalescence with freedom in the present. So it's like a presentism, a constant contemporaneity. So these are the kind of claims that have often been given to why art would oppose reason, right? They're just like a really simple list for us there to think about.
Amanda, may I chip in very briefly about this supposition of reason? Because I remember that when I was studying in the undergrad, I think this supposition was actually quite explicit. And I remember that one of the texts that we read in the academy was a text by George Steiner, The 9 Possible Reasons for the Sadness of Thought. And this text was basically doing like a questioning first of the impossibility of thinking. Like it's very explicit, like you actually can't like form a constructive way of thought. And it leaps then to the indeterminate, but in a more like of a defeatist way. Like we can't think as humans, we can't find a stable ground. So it's actually, I think, quite dangerous to make this this a part of the academic project in 21st century art. That's why I think I actually turned to a more serious philosophical undertaking, but I think this is actually quite explicit, like sometimes in the academy itself.
Yes, and if I understand you correctly, I mean, this is the kind of, it's actually, for me, I would say it's a misunderstanding of what thinking is, because there's a kind of hubris of saying that we have understood the limits of the capacity of thought. So discourses on failure, whilst they're saying, whilst they're located in the indeterminate, which is to say they are things that aren't locatable because they are by necessity indeterminate, actually produce the figures of indeterminacy that very much operate as borders and territories for the capacity for us to think. Does that make sense, what I'm saying there, in response to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it actually undermines like what you said before about the autonomy. Like it doesn't leave, like, you know, this subjectivist kind of freedom doesn't leave open space for a building of autonomy, like in the rational sense, I think.
I agree, and that's why I would kind of bring in this problem of a kind of naive realism or dogmatic or fundamentalist theological aspect, is that, and which is, like I say, it's a naive version. It's not like suddenly you said, okay, let's return to theology. It's precisely the opposite, but it invites forms of closure that cannot be fully articulated by the theory itself, because the theory believes so much that the works or operations it's moving through and producing are indeterminate and therefore open. It cannot understand itself as manifesting borders, territories, and limitations, and forms of hierarchical dominance. So
I also wanted to comment shortly on that, because it's kind of interesting that the question is, why oppose reason? It's like, yeah, give me reasons to oppose reason itself. Like kind of, okay, this is the snake biting its own tail, and that actually, okay, you are still in the mode of operation in reason, and you cannot step out of reason even if you claim to critique it, and therefore, like the only way to really step out of reason would be to not give arguments whatsoever, also not of the switch in the mode of operation, and like to become the total singularity. And
that's wonderful. Yeah, that's exactly
this this seems kind of paradox to actually ask the question, why oppose reason? There is no outside of reason if you give any arguments.
But what it does, this is what I'm very interested in, is the very oppositions to reason that we have seen in culture generate hierarchies of reason themselves. And so we can
What do you mean with hierarchies of reason here?
Well, okay, yeah. I mean, like, I'm not teaching Sellers in this seminar, but we could say, like, for example, what do we think about the hierarchies of reason in Sellers' work? We have the sapient and the sentient. We have, in other people's work, we could have the pathological and the epistemological. We have different, if reason is the very definition of what it is to be human, the ability for us to think about thinking and to be self-aware, at the bottom level of our being human, then what forms of reason can we kind of extrapolate with this facility? And are we then seeing differences, like hierarchies, between what we might call the given of reason, the pathological, like bio kind of politics or biogenetics of reason, and the idea of what is a kind of labor of reason, what is the kind of progressive possibilities of facilitating and using this thing we have the capacity for. So, the hierarchy of reason might be the fact, well, yeah, we all can be self-conscious and self-aware, but what forms of progress, what qualities, what logic are used or evident within the reason itself? So, you know, the production of mythologies and folklore is a use of reason.
I just wanted to really shortly intervene, and concerning the hierarchies of reason, the thing that came to mind is the notion of the Caliban, which is the whole in post-colonial theory, when indigenous people are considered to not be reasonable or to talk nonsense, and thus their way of reasoning is considered like non-existent, I would say.
Yes, and that's what's so important about making a distinction between the Enlightenment, the massive problems that we've seen and know very well about Enlightenment imperialist operations of reason, how it was facilitated through capital and in the kind of ordering of the world at a global scale, and the possibilities for reason today, what can be a true project of emancipation today, and what hierarchies does that entail? What is it? What and who was excluded in these systems, and how can we actually think about a real emancipatory projects in an egalitarian framework? Can reason be adhere to the principles of equality? And I think these are all really important questions about not just people and persons, but also, as I think you're saying, what do we recognize as a language? Like, how do we accept what is a language? And we often tend to dismiss systems that we cannot find patterns within, or what don't adhere to our traditions, as noise, nonsense, chaos, primitive, anything. We could use all these terms, and of course some of these terms are pejorative, such as primitive, but there are ways, I think, to think about the egality of reason as something that is shared, and to accept that there are other languages, there are other systems, not just one way of manifesting reason. And I think this is what, when I first introduced this idea of the image of reason as not being a mirror of a mode of thought, that there's not this kind of one aesthetic that can give us the answer and say, this is what reason looks like. I think this is the mistake that a lot of artworks and the political scene historically have made. And you're pointing out a really good example of that, is that the aesthetics of reason was a particular human. It was a white man in a particular outfit, with a particular vernacular, with a particular rhetoric, with a particular education, in a particular space. And I think that this is a problem of representation, and a problem of how we understand representation as well, and aesthetics. So I think when we discuss what reason is, and that's why I think this, what we're trying to do in this discussion over the weeks, is to antagonize the figures of the real figures of reason, and to kind of see what alien or other aleatory forms of language that we might not even recognize as languages can be brought into our understanding without undermining them in another aesthetic, right? Without monopolizing them, which is what imperialism did.
Sort of, kind of, yeah. I'm just silently agreeing with you.
Okay, no, I think it's a brilliant thing you brought up, and we have to continually cross the parameters. And that's what I was trying to say earlier, that this isn't like a philosophy class, but it's a class where we're trying to cross the dynamics of all these forms of thought, and to see how they play off against each other and problematize each other. And we'll find maybe more difficult limitations as well. I'm not going to say that we can rescue this project, right? We have to, it's a problem. So thank you for that comment.
One short, very short question. Is this okay? You have a fixed image of reason, which is maybe, yeah, Enlightenment, modernism, and then a reconfigured image, or a plurality of images of reason, without saying, okay, reason itself does not exist, or anything like that. Like somehow the road that postmodern theory goes a little bit, or like a general critique of reason. Is this like this the neo-rationalist program, or what distinguishes the neo-rationalist program from old Enlightenment philosophies?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just say on the side, like a personal note from me. I mean, I don't want to talk about my artwork, but I will just say one thing, is that often when I'm giving talks, like in public and whatever, the audience usually, or they have often asked a question and said, you're proposing a new realist politics, and you're proposing like this kind of redemption of reason. And they're saying, well, what does that look like? Like, what does it look like? Give us the answer of like an aesthetic paradigm of this. And of course I can say, well, yeah, well, as an artist, because that's primarily what I do, I make art. My artwork is this. It's not an example of it. It is that, right? That's what I would say. But I'm not saying that everyone should make art that looks like mine. Right? That's not the answer that I'm giving. It's, for me, it's a form of constructivism that is required. And that's what I would argue for in that sense. And for me, it's more of a methodological or attitude or behavioral question rather than having this aesthetic outcome, like we will all do this or we will all do that. Instead, it's a question of how do we produce, what are the political problems of producing the consensus we need in order to work together. This is a common problem with any, like, you know, do we need a Stalin? Well, you know, what forms of power are engaged to enable what we might call the space of a egalitarian discursive operation of reason. So this might have its own violence, and I think these are things we have to talk about too. Okay, so
yeah, sorry,
right.
sorry. Do you mind? I think we might be getting a little bit stuck here, but I think that's fine too, because it's an interesting sort of place to be stuck in. I noted before that you used reason as a verb, and I think that was a very sort of beautiful thing, and I think that can be quite helpful sometimes when you're sort of dealing with this kind of issue that reason is something you do. But I would also like to ask a question. Jumping back a little bit to the question regarding sort of the relationship between reason and some idea of unreason. And the question, which is perhaps in 3 parts, is, I mean, is there a beyond the reason which reason cannot think, or any possible sort of reason cannot think about? Or rather, if there is such a beyond the reason, can reason think that beyond? And if it cannot, what is the relationship between reason and unreason that is excluded from reason? And I think that sort of ties into that.
Yeah, I think what you're making me think of, and I wonder what other people are thinking in the group, but you're making me think of how, first of all, we might mistake the idea of unreason, this non, as a thing in itself. And what I think we will be looking at is, especially in our maybe the Althusser and the Gruenbaum, is how things that are not, that we consider to be irreducible to reason, we often can think of them as time-based, in the sense that what is irreducible to reason in one life is not in another. So we cannot absolutely claim irreducibility. I would think that's something that's important, but also how what we consider to be irreducible plays a part in systems of reason in itself. So, for example, you know, the way we might make the way modal vocabularies operate, we could think about how claims are made through heuristics in mathematics when we don't have all the information we need, and yet we still think and we still make claims.
Certainly. The question is, I guess, what is lost in making these claims, potentially?
What is lost in making
in the act of making this claim that goes that's, you know, that seeks to apprehend that which is allegedly beyond reason in reason? Is something lost in that claim?
Well, I think that just to maybe perhaps reiterate, I think the only thing that we could, well, not the only thing, but one thing that we would lose is by mistaking what is irreducible to reason as a permanent absolute thing in itself. And I think that's the problem that we see in a lot of thinking, and especially in the art world, the kind of and again, it's in the slide kind of that I have up here, this kind of idea of magic, or the unknown, the way the unknown is harnessed and made equivalent to certain forms of aesthetic practices. often through like really weak forms of phenomenological discourse, in my opinion. And I think that for me, that is what is lost. The fact that we give up on the irreducible. We allow it to maintain its irreducibility without poking it and thinking through it at a much more deep level. And when I say it and poking it, I know it sounds like I'm also saying thingifying it, and I don't mean to do that. But I mean to think, for me, it's a matter of thinking. I mean, I guess, you know, you might call me an old structuralist, but I very much, for me, I think through structures and conditions in that way, and systems. And I think it's through thinking about the processes of thought that I can access this claim that whilst I can take the temporal irreducibilities seriously, I also acknowledge them as, hopefully acknowledge them as temporal. And I'm saying that without irony. I don't mean to be, I don't mean to say I take it seriously on the one hand and then treat it as a false premise on the other. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that how do we interact with the fact that something we think at this time is irreducible, but how do we treat it as non-irreducible, as possibly reducible to the understanding, without over-determining it? So these are my questions. I'm not going to be able to answer that, but these are questions as a kind of researcher through art, I guess, constantly come to me.
Could one say that in treating what is not reducible to reason at one point of time as a thing in itself is like a re-essentializing of the other, like a lot of the claims of postmodern discourse is, or deconstruction, is that it's an anti-essentialism. It doesn't say, okay, this or that is necessary. But if you say, okay, the other, the outside of discourse is just, you re-essentialize it and re-romanticize it in, oh, the other. And yeah, I mean, in a lot of political discourse, we recognize that.
Definitely.
Kind of a vulgar reception of postmodernism, I think.
That's a very nice way of putting it. Yes, absolutely. So how do we have a respectful relationship between what we know and what we do not know without producing dogmatic borders on the limits of knowledge that absolutely do essentialize in that way, whilst taking our limits quite seriously as well? Because we have to accept that there are things we do not know yet.
I think one thing that just really briefly what Carl said, I really appreciate, because aside from a lot of the language focus, I think, which is definitely important, but maybe also sometimes gets in the way of like more of the material kind of side of reasoning, or indeed the embodied or situated ways of reasoning, because there's also different modes of reasoning, certainly. So there's obviously deductive, inductive, abductive. And I think one of the more common things that happens, especially viewed from a philosophy of technology kind of perspective, is that we often assume that we're acting according to given rules when actually we're like already in the abductive. But because the material spaces around us are only configured to a certain kind of abducting from somewhere, we kind of assume that we're acting in the classical a priori axiom-driven reasoning style, which I think is also something that kind of when art claims to be open for interpretation is just very much, on the one hand, shallow or very cynical, because it's only open to certain people that have the material access or that can read the few signs that are left open for interpretation to then abduct a kind of ruleful truth from it. So, and I think that's something that could be said about art in terms of interpretation, and it could be said about very mundane everyday life kind of things, like, for example, news feeds at the moment, or more contemporary technologies. But what I said about Carl, I think what's really, really important is the praxis of reasoning, and not just the kind of like the language and symbolic facts of reasoning. So more of a syntactical approach to and operational functional account of it.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating too. And I guess that's why I am very interested in, as I was saying, in systems and structures, because this is what we navigate through and with, and often being oblivious to them, as you say, and they produce our worlds and how we are with each other, and how we treat each other, but also how we define the very conditions which we, as you say, often presume neutrality or presume objectivity, whereas all the time, of course, we have ideology all the way down and bias all the way down. So how do we think through bias, through ideology? And this is again why I think I chose the Althusser, to allow us to think about this as well, with the spontaneous philosophy of the scientist. It's a text which is very much trying to deal with that. So yeah, thank you. And I'm gonna now just like, you know, try and encapsulate just some of the things that I want to, like, I mean, we're already doing it, which is great in the discussion, but this is kind of what I'm hoping we're going to get through in the next 4 weeks. So I've just been talking about how many theories have explored the relations between what we know and how we know it. We have these ideas of subjective epistemologies and the apprehension, I'm going to move this, of the subject in Kantian aesthetics, for example. We'll be talking a little bit about that as we go forward. And then we can talk about the difference between the way in which we understand reason as a pathology, which is what we've been just looking at, as something given to the human, and the way in which we perform transcendental thinking regarding the question of what is reason, what is it to reason? So this idea of the verb comes back. Does asking the question of reason enables us to reason more effectively? Or, you know, is that a red herring? You know, does that just cause this kind of problematic regressive ontology in terms of like what Althusser might call the circle of decision? Is epistemology the means by which reason advances its power? So I think these are genuine questions we need to think about. And I think we'll try and explore this relationship between the language that expresses our reason, the locales, forms, and aesthetics that are taken in the languages and images of reason, and the question of what is reason. And then this is central to the question of art today, I think. And I think we've already really opened up some of these problems today already. We should ask if art has anything to do with reason. It's a kind of first question already, I think, to ask. And if it has, is art seen as a mirror of it, which is what we've kind of worried about already? Or is it able as well to develop and advance propositions for the definition of what reason is and can be? So not only to perform reason, but to produce some kind of understanding of what reason can be in itself. So this is kind of art in its many multiple operations. It could even possibly do these two things at the same time. I also want to just highlight like my basic kind of delivery here on scientific method. And all I'm thinking about when I'm thinking of scientific method is just this idea of this kind of idea of realism and the notion of a mind-independent reality, the question of the images science produces and its history, and the role of scientific method as a possibility today, the aspirations of epistemological thinking, and the modalities of artistic practice. And I think all these kind of things grouped together in my little list here, we're going to try and move through it in some way. And so when I talk about scientific method, I'm not really wanting to like say, let's talk about the sciences, right? I'm not going to, I mean, if you guys really want to talk about that, you can tell me about it. But I'm more thinking about just a methodology in artistic practice that has attempted to, in more recent years, to antagonize, dislocate, think through the not only alienation in a productive way, in a constructive way, but has tried to think about like Althusser's anti-humanist work, the idea of we have non-humanism, we have post-humanism, but these practices and ideas are very different, but there's a common understanding here of this Mayasuian condition of the world without us, and what it means to think about the production of intelligence, like the use of intelligence, the production of knowledge, and how art, despite its history of having this romantic, dysfunctional status in the world, can also, how it can think about it, how it functions. What is a functionalist practice that might allow us to think about the difference between functionalism and instrumentalism, for example. And I think these are all, again, questions that we could ask as we move through. And then, I mean, just really briefly, I would love to, I mean, I'm sure, you know, I feel like you don't need to know this stuff because I think you would know it anyway, but I'm just gonna like move really quickly through a little description between negative dialectics and this project of Lyotard's, Les Immatériaux. And not many people might want to talk about Adorno today, but I find it still an interesting prospect. And also how negative dialectics in Adornian theory have provide a bridge to thinking about some of the core developments in post-structuralist theory, kind of whether we like it or not. So I'm going to try and do that, but again, interrupt me as we go. I've just put some slides up here, just for those of you who might not know, just basically about Adorno and his life emigrating to Los Angeles in the face of Nazism and persecution. And how, as you might have gathered from the text, that there's a particularly pessimistic view of culture. I mean, Adorno used to write hate tracts against America under the pseudonym Harold Rottweiler, and he would make these like little zines and like have them disseminated in LA. And he was also working, as I'm sure you know, for Rockefeller. He would work at the Social Research Institute, and one of the things he also did was he researched the role of advertising on the radio, because there was one point where there weren't adverts on the radio, where there were just plays and like long plays being performed. And he realized that if you break up a play into little sections and then put an advert, like for example Pear Soap, which is one of the first adverts on the radio, he realized that you could like invent the cliffhanger, the tantalizing moment where tune in the next time or come back after the ads and hear more. And he realized that interjecting a play with adverts increased listeners, it increased the audience. So it's kind of fascinating to me that you have Adorno who's doing this social research on how to like produce audiences for Rockefeller's like research institute work, and at the same time he's writing hate tracts against America under this Harold Rottweiler character and writing them theory. So I think it's a fascinating character to think about in the history of technology, culture, commodification, and aesthetics, and post-Marxian thinking. But that's a kind of side story for me, because I just kind of like thinking about that. But the reason I guess, you know, we could think about it in relationship to the problems of the Enlightenment is that Adorno's work includes a huge critique of Enlightenment reason. And, you know, the claim here that Adorno and Horkheimer claim that reason itself has regressed to a form of mythology, and it produces this state of superstitious culture, where culture is a myth or a superstition. And we have this idea of barbarism, fascism, and of ultimately totalitarianism and Auschwitz. So we have this kind of deep problem in the role of dialectics as a site of becoming. And I'm sure most of you know that a dialectic is two opposing arguments put into motion, reasoned out to expose a truth. Rationality appeals to of course, logic, not emotion, and truth is discovered in the way that we could be a guide for one's life.
Amanda?
Yeah?
Just one short comment about the two previous slides.
Yeah.
Because there was dialectical materialism, and I was asking because, as far as I know, Adorno is put into this category of Western Marxism emerging with Lukács, and which are pretty much opposed to the Soviet style dialectical materialism, and which, in dialectical materialism, you have like the dialectics of nature, and everything develops from these laws, dialectical laws of nature, and the Western Marxists, because I wanted to ask about that point, dialectical materialism, historical materialism, and Western Marxism.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because when you think about Engels', of course, treatise on nature, you have to, you start with the kind of condition of nature as the base for the dialectic itself, and the concepts of time, for example, are crucial to that. Whereas in Adorno, we have historical research, we have sociological research, don't we?
Yeah, one has always this mediation, the transcendental sphere is not simply dismissed as, it's just an emergent, it emerges from the laws of nature, but it's socially, historically mediated, and that's why ideology is a problem at all. And you don't just make positive economics, and from that you can say, society will develop in this or that way.
Yeah. And then, what's fascinating, I think, in Adorno is that you end up with nature on the other side, because by producing this negative dialectic, that this, as I say here, this negation of negation, what is left out is there is a space that is left kind of unthought, if you like, and that is the kind of naturalization of the sight of capital as barbarism, as a kind of chaotic nature which comes out of the forms of cultural production that he sees as inescapable. So there is a kind of form of nature that's imposed and unthought over culture. So it's like, almost, for me, it's like the other way around. Okay. So to continue just here, we have Adorno is rejecting the idea that the process of negation, as in Hegel's traditional standard dialectics, he rejects it because it does not, he says it doesn't produce a larger truth, and it doesn't produce possible emancipatory outcomes. So Adorno saw a determinate power for dialectical theory, but this would be because the process of dialectical reason could expose the very limits of thinking in itself, and therefore connect to a reality beyond the space of knowledge and language. And this is what I mean about this like other nature. This was not necessarily redemptive or liberatory, as there's no unity to come or to find or to seek. So dialectics in this Adornian territory is applied here to the process of thought itself, not just to things or concepts in the world. If there is a liberatory aim here, it is to free dialectics itself from the historical traditions that has been previously associated with. And I think, there's a kind of fascinating project there, whether we like it or not. I mean, of course, as I just hinted at, it's got its own limitations because it refuses to think. It produces, through thought, it produces a space that is unthought, which is characterized by the inescapability of capital itself, like the kind of trap of capital. There is no beyond the conditions of the constraints of this chaotic nature that is dressed in the social barbarism of commodity capitalism. So we have this space in negative dialectics that gives us this field of the culture industry, where there's a monopoly on life, as you've read in the text, which I hope you managed to see. You know, it's a machinic space. There's no capacity to make a distinction between culture and reality. The space of the everyday becomes a space of horror. It's characterized through various disorientations in very traditional modernist terms. It's delirious, it's horrific. The world is charged with the barbarism of images. And it seems to be impossible. The world is impossible. It's impossible to cut or control. The imagination is controlled. And whilst, you know, even at the end of the culture industry text, he says, we know this, but we don't care. There's kind of this ambivalence, this kind of lack of, I mean that in a parochial sense, that there's this kind of awareness, but there's also this kind of submission to the conditions of a deeper psychological control of this semantic territory. And also we see that the myth of reason produces this condition as a kind of state of evil. So it's got this kind of dark moral categorizing, and there's a lot of, I mean, we could talk about the morality in this text a lot. So, but one of the things, maybe some of you guys who are doing studies in technology might, I thought, you know, I didn't know that you'd have that knowledge, but maybe you'll know about Ernst Junger. I just wanted to kind of do a little bit on Junger here, because not only is he a favorite thinker of mine, and I like to think about his work, but I find it kind of fascinating that how these questions around reason actually feed into techno-aesthetics and also selfhood. And I think, you know, in Adorno's essay in the culture industry, what I find still quite remarkable is this kind of deep sadness and hope for the human to return in a particular heroic form, and this kind of idea that something's lost. And it kind of, the other side of this, I think, to Adorno's work is the non-dialectical work of Ernst Junger, who is kind of working at the same time and also a German. He studied with Benjamin in Jena. And so there's a kind of strange kind of link across these guys' work. And in Ernst Junger's work, you see, he wrote science fiction. He wrote about language, and he wrote many books, Der Arbeiter, The Worker, Storm and Steel. His work was embraced by the Nazi Party. I'm sure you know, if you know about Junger, that one of his books was made into a small pocket book that could fit into soldiers' pockets when they went to war in the Second World War. And we have this developing aesthetic of one of the early sci-fi images that we now know and many of us love, I guess, or enjoy, like the image of the Terminator, the image of the Fritz Lang's Metropolis. They all derive from this Jungerian sci-fi world, which is also kind of influenced by Edgar Allan Poe and contemporary technology at the time. So he developed this idea called heroic realism. It's an embracing of technology and machinic power. It's also one of the first writers that I can think of that did not reject capitalism, did not want to escape capital, but wanted to think through the logics of capital, and often did so with this idea of the self-sacrificing subject. We will put ourselves in danger. So it has this dandy kind of element to it as well, you know, in a kind of Baudelairean moment of, what did Baudelaire say? Fight like the Spartan boy under the fox's tooth, you know, like to expose yourself to danger. It's Nietzschean influenced world of sacrificing the self. So the conviction here was to live a heroic modern life, and to live with the idea of technology as an oppressive force that would actually give you this kind of almost erotic pleasure of disassembling the body into a machinic apparatus. Someone, I can't remember who of you it was, but you were talking about bees, I think. And one of my favorite texts by Junger is, he wrote a text called Die Glassen Bienen, called The Glass Bees. It's like a really early sci-fi short story. And I don't know if that's going to be helpful to you if you haven't read it, but it's a short text. You might want to look at that. But it's a very nice text about an inventor who invents bees, but they're made of glass and they act like bees. But of course they're artificial, like they're artificial bees, they're robot bees. And it's this kind of replication of nature in this like fascinating beauty. So, and then the story continues from there. So I'm not going to tell you what happens. But anyway, it could be interesting. But yeah, Junger produces this perverse pleasure in a cultic self-sacrifice. It's a reasoning of the subject as a kind of object, as a kind of machinic enterprise in itself. So we have this merging of flesh and wire, of metal and organics. And for one of the first images that I think existed like this in the, in the 20s. And I've just got a little bit here from The Storm of Steel. And he says, these moments of nocturnal prowling leave an indelible impression. Eyes and ears are tense to the maximum. The rustling approach of strange feet in the tall grass is an unutterably menacing thing. Your breath comes in shallow bursts. You have to force yourself to stifle any panting or wheezing. There is a little mechanical click as the safety catch of your pistol is taken off. The sound cuts straight through your nerves. Your teeth are grinding on the fuse pin of the hand grenade. The encounter will be short and murderous. You tremble with two contradictory impulses, the heightened awareness of the huntsman and the terror of the quarry. You are whirled to yourself, saturated with the appalling aura of the savage landscape. So, this is how he writes. And is kind of this collapse between registers of violence, viscera, inorganic, organic, qualities of life, this kind of materiality of sensation and objects and flesh together, where the click of a gun is like in parallel or collapsed with the grinding of teeth. So this is the kind of stuff that you get in Junger, and I just wanted to give you an example of this kind of celebration of violence and war.
I have a question or commentary about more of a framing about the framing of Junger, because as far as I know, he is basically seen as at least proto-fascist.
Yeah.
And and I know that he's very much recepted in Germany from the new right, from the proto-fascist new right. So he's having an upheaval again, like because he said that he's somehow like the non-dialectical downside of Adorno's work, and yeah.
So both Adorno and Junger kind of diagnosed capital as a problem, right? But what you get in Junger is the kind of accelerationist style self-sacrifice to the inevitability of capitalism, a mode that is destructive of a destructive space, and one could participate in that mode of violence and destruction in this heroic way. And he's epic leftist, proto-fascist, and many, this is what his work has constantly been read like that over generations, decades. And it's kind of important, I think, to one of the reasons I wanted to bring in Junger was because it gives us a kind of hint into the way of looking at Lyotard as well. He was saying similar things. So we have to think about the political implications of these critiques of reason and these celebrations of unreason, if you like, in these modes of formats of different forms of accelerationism. And I think that's why I did want to just highlight Jung's work as being kind of a fascinating problem to have to grapple with today, still after all the years of him writing this stuff.
No, I didn't want to say, oh, here is a category, we put Jünger in it, and that's it, we don't need to consider him any. I think that's dogmatic thought, and that's a very dangerous thought also, because then we would say, oh, we know the world is here, this is this, and it's not, we're not asking questions any longer. But I just wanted to give this disclaimer, short framing, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, it's vital to do that. And like I say, we need to, I'm not here to say, I'm not here to say, I'm going to look at Lyotard and say, what a terrible person, right? This is not about that for me. This is more like, what are the implications of the approach to aesthetics and scientific realism and reason in these philosophies, and the kind of, like, say, the curation that Lyotard produced? What are the implications and consequences of it for today's thought, and how have they been resuscitated in different formats to advocate for new forms of inequality? So I think it's important to really, yeah, like you say, to take these texts and genres in thought just for a moment in themselves. And then also have this contextualization with them in like formats of the alt-right as they are being used today. So yes, I agree. And I was gonna show you some clips of these things, but you can like find them yourselves. But I wanted to remind us that these aesthetics of the organic, the inorganic, desire, body, and technology are very much, we see them all the time, and they're often like David Cronenberg's work is, as I know one of you, I think, is a Canadian, so fellow Canadian there. It's been like, very key to investigating. So I think these are things to think about from, I'm interested in how these like manifest in narrative, not just aesthetics, but narrative aesthetics. And also in like Fritz Lang's Metropolis, where I'm sure you've seen it, but if you haven't, you should watch it, because, we see these things being played out where the first manifestations of the techno human robot is put forward, where, the invention of an automated human body disrupts the possibility of resolving the issues of workers' unification of power with bosses and rulers. So in Metropolis, there's this fantasy idea that the below ground world where all the workers are, and the upper level where all the bosses are, and the kind of aristocratic middle and also middle classes are, they can be unified through through love, mediation, and talk. There can be a resolution between these hierarchies, and equalities can be produced through certain forms of commitment. But in the film, of course, there's a production of a fake heroine. Like there's this heroine called Maria. They have a fake version of her, like a copy, as a robot who intervenes and produces the site of rebellion, and the workers destroy the factory and the underground world they live in, which on the one hand could be seen to be like a positive revolutionary condition, but at the same time, the children of the workers are, they risk the lives of their own families. So there's a kind of, the only way the workers are given the sight of revolution is if they have no future, like no offspring, no future, like literally for their lives. So there's the sacrifice there is huge. It's a sacrifice for no future. And this is the ultimatum, like, if you like, that the automated body and revolution gives these workers. So there's no resolution for the problem of inequality through automation in this film. Instead, it produces death and the destruction of the workers' future. So, you know, I think these things are kind of useful allegories or useful theoretical positions in a way to still think about today. Like, is this viable? Is that a critique of inequalities in automation that is still standard today or not? I don't know. I mean, I wonder what you guys think about that as well. So these are things I think we could like think about through both the aesthetics and formats of technology and automation. And then I just want to remind you like about the show that Lyotard curated. And this was, of course, Les Immatériaux at the Centre Pompidou in 1985. And I sent you some bits and pieces on this, but I kind of wanted also to preempt like the show with this little reminder again of Ernst Junger, because I just kind of find it again pretty fascinating that, you know, this show was based on this idea of flux, flow, networks, connectivity. And, you know, the idea of a world of connectivity was not new, but had grown in early modernity. And so as early as 1949, Ernst Junger's fiction Heliopolis conjured the phonophore, a device that could link everyone together in a technically facilitated forum and replace the need for personal documents like passports, as well as watches and libraries, etc. So in 1965, you know, developments in computer science, and you've got Ted Nelson coining the term hypertext, a file structure for the changing and indeterminate. And it's like a kind of literal manifestation of Junger's fiction. So it's got this weird projective quality, and I just wanted to like remind you of that. And I'm sure most of you know this already from what your backgrounds, but I just thought it was kind of interesting in terms of like Lyotard's show that this history of immateriality, the unseen networks, flows, and structures of the social that Lyotard wanted to concentrate on in this show, of course, were not new subjects. This is not like a brand new thing that came in the 80s. This is something that had been around for a long time. And just this idea, of course, that how it fits into post-structuralist dynamics, where, of course, networks have no central authority or single point of distribution. And then we've got this idea of the early internet, network communications, and developed ideas of human to non-human communication and interfaces. And the idea that machines improved communication. I mean, these are just simple things to remember, and how these are things that Lyotard's thinking about at this time. And I just wanted to also, you know, like background this post-structuralist moment and to remind ourselves of some of the histories and conditions. One is the failure of national and global revolutionary projects, fears of neo-fascism, the association with both left and right-wing movements with terror, inequity and genocide after Stalin, Mao and Hitler. We have renewed skepticism regarding reason and instrumentality. Reason was associated with the cultic violence of its own excess. This excess and unpredictable effects of reason was viewed to be a result of means, ends, politics and planning. You've got like kind of figures like Machiavelli haunting this landscape. We've got the idea of predictive behavior was connected to dominance and or like theological mysticism. And we have, you know, ideas like, I mean, later we'd see behavioral economics. And the assertion of groundlessness as a significant truth to house the theory of human society, no God nor absolute truth. So we've got these kind of things that are like floating around in this kind of political moment. And I just wanted to like remind us of that for Lyotard's work. So we've also got like a post-68 moment. We have a renewed commitment to indeterminacy, chance and temporality. We have anarchisms of no future, the attention to the self in a very particular way after the failures of particular forms of progressive politics after, you know, like the moment of 68. And these, as I said right at the beginning, these kind of commitments to indeterminacy and the views of it would seem to prevent the dominance of reason from having total control, the kind of control that Adorno was so worried about. And in the midst of all this, we see the energized rise of what would be neoliberalism. So we can kind of make these connections between post-structuralism, neoliberalism, and the failure of certain, like this idea of an acceptance that modernity had failed us. And I'm not going to talk through the slides so much. I think we've talked about this already, actually. You know, like, what is our bottom line? I think this is like, these are the more for like philosophical questions that I wonder what you guys think about. Like, what is, you know, how do we think about the human in itself? Like, do we have like grounds that we, like as individuals, like go to work with? Do we have presuppositions that bias our very interrogation of these themes? And, you know, I think about, you know, this might depend on where you come from, what discourses you're involved in, what people you've read, and, you know, like, is, you know, for example, we can have theorists like Hobbes, Rousseau, and Nietzsche who naturalize the human as a violent, as violence. It's natural, and naturalize inequalities as part of the condition of the human, where other kind of formats look at the idea of the bottom line of the human is to be as a peaceful animal, where reason is seen to corrupt humankind. And we get this in theological narratives like Adam and Eve and the original sin being reason, to know, to become self-conscious. We have the idea that reason is an appendage cultivated on top of base existence. And other theories argue that reason goes all the way down and includes sensory life and intuition, and people like Sellars' work. So I think that these are all things we need to, like, we can all discuss and think through, and we might all have very different opinions about that, which we can entertain. And I'm just gonna like show you a few like images from the reading, I guess, that we've already had, but I just want to like remind you of this and the themes that we're operating with Lyotard's show, which are many. We have, for example, the exhibition of non-exhibition. The theme of the non is crucial. The question of the social and political change, the future, the question of an exhibition of curation as a tool to think another way of being. And this is, I guess, what I was referring to earlier, is this terraforming of the real, this kind of producing a site for the real to be inhabited by humans. The way in which we might take a planet and turn it into a place where we can exist. The show kind of, for me anyway, seemed to produce its own ontological condition and say, here is a space which we can step into, and we enter the real, we enter this world of networks, flows, and communications that we often do not see at the level of aesthetics. So it's this kind of almost explication in real time of the deeper infrastructures of life itself through communication systems. And these are just some of the images that you guys have been given. This is from the exhibition catalogue, and I just added these like notes on it to kind of highlight the language in a kind of lit crit kind of way. You know, that these references to the idea of staging, so it has a performative quality, the idea that he says it is in our heads that all this changes, so how conceptualization works is a kind of dominance, is not outside, but it's something that we give to ourselves. And there's another show slide. And also the aims to communicate complexity and how one would navigate the show. And, you know, if you've read anything about this show, the idea was you'd enter and you had to have headphones on. You would have voices in your ear all the way round. The show would be like a labyrinth. It would be deliberately disorientating. There wasn't one way. It was supposed to be non-hierarchical. It was huge. You might have missed portions of it. It was complex, challenging, and difficult to actually maneuver. So whilst it was highly choreographed, it was also this idea of openness where you would be a mode of like kind of, let me call, maybe this is using the word incorrectly, but kind of vectoring the exhibition. You would be a dynamic as part of it, running through it. And one of the ideas of the show was that your movements, you would have a magnetic card and you would touch as you would go in certain rooms, and then your data would be collected to deliver ultimately maps of the human connectivity and interaction throughout the whole show. And many people did this, and there were many maps produced of the operations of like human interaction as well, as which would be laid back into the show as another layer of information for the curation. So it was a kind of consistent palimpsest of information. And that's just like a little bit more about the non-hierarchical navigation systems that were meant to be produced, the ideas of excess, extensions, and unfathomability of the experience. And this all plays into like these questions of Lyotard's work as being an attempt to have no standard critique, to reject theory, to reject standard forms of reason through a different kind of thinking. So this was all, of course, conditioned on Lyotard's understanding of capital. And this is where we get this question of like how we have the idea of capital as a space that one does not escape from, that there's conditions within capital that have their own irreducibilities to normative standard forms of reason as projected through and by capital. But these are other ecologies of the economies of capital through the libidinal. And this is like what is spoken to, I think, in the libidinal economy in many ways. And I know, you know, one of you guys was saying you wanted to say something about the libidinal economy, and I wondered if you had a few comments on it now, if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, okay. I was a bit disoriented by what you said, because as far as I know from what I know about Lyotard's reception is that L'Immaterieux was after he wrote The Postmodern Condition in 1979, and that his libidinal phase, which comes from Deleuze-Guattari's Anti-Oedipus, where he is heavily influenced by them, and under their influence he writes Libidinal Economy, and also the text reread today, Every Political Economy is Libidinal. But that he basically rejected this whole phase with his Kantian turn to the postmodern theory, which is much more focused on language, on how on mediation and on the plurality of mediation and of language games, whereas the whole libidinal phase is like subverting mediation, and whereas Daniel Sassilotto gave a very good opposition in the 20th century philosophy, where you have like after Kant, you have like at one point overcoming critique, which is Deleuze-Guattari, and I think also the Lyotard of the libidinal period, because like critique is totally subverted. There is something that I think you could say, desire, basically desire, or jouissance, which is the liberating force, and not critique, which is always conceptual, which always yeah, to say it with Deleuze and Guattari maybe, which is somehow re-territorializing, which is somehow not liberatory enough, and that but then the other part, the other kind of reaction to Kant would be the radicalization of critique, which is not okay. No, let's just totally forget critique, but okay, radicalize it and always ask about the boundaries of possibility of knowledge and experience. Like Kant makes this stable space, the stable transcendental framework. This is outside, this is inside of our possible objects of knowledge and experience, and that's it. But that the radicalization of critique, like what we know as postmodern theory or deconstruction, is always this, okay, we cannot establish a stable transcendental framework. We cannot know this. We can never, because we cannot actually say, well, now we have, we cannot know if there is something else outside that may disrupt these framework or our framework. And that's what discourse theory basically leads up to, I think. Yeah. And I don't know, I think there are I've recently read The Postmodern Condition, and I think there, although it's very focused on this language game, this, okay, we have a plurality, non-totalizable of language game, there are some which are always like kind of idealist, I think, because it's always focused on language, on very anthropocentric. But there are some parts that are pretty materialist in the way that, okay, the plurality of language games is very, very related to this idea of connectivity, to complex structures of communication, telecommunication. And so there is a little bit of ambivalence, which, yeah, is often glanced over, and maybe this is what he takes up in Les Immatérieux. This, okay, this somehow this non-discursive infrastructure which makes possible this plurality of language games, basic. Maybe that's, and but which we don't immediately experience as material. Like, okay, the internet is only possible because there are big fat cables in the ocean, and they are, of course, material, but we don't experience the phenomenological. I'm talking to all of you, and I don't see any cables connected to my computer at the moment, but they are there. And yeah, maybe, yes, that's just maybe what I have to say about in relation to Les Immatérieux.
Yeah.
And maybe just a short point about the text of every libidinal economy is, every political economy is libidinal. It's about, it's in response to Baudrillard, and because Baudrillard critiqued Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus and Lyotard's libidinal economy for focusing on this libidinal idea, and also for raising up certain distinctions which he thought would somehow introduce a dogmatic human agency, that this liberation of free flows of desire somehow leads to the liberation of the human. But Baudrillard basically said, well, these are pretty much like dogmatic. They are not they are not inherent in this theory. And if you want to go this way, you need to go all the way and abandon any agency of the human. And I'm not really sure how this relates to Lyotard's response in this, because Lyotard's response seems basically to go in this, like, yeah, well, okay, yeah, fuck revolution, fuck human agency, we can enjoy capital and our bodies being dissected by capital. And so, yeah, that's maybe what I wanted to say, or could say about this text and its relation to discourses.
Yeah, I think that all your points are really significant, and I guess I share if I understand you correctly, you know, when I think about the show, I see many strands of like the conditions of his thinking kind of coalescing and like intersecting in complex ways. Some of which, you know, what I think is interesting about when people start to like manifest their theory, right? Whether it's in a show or in an artwork, or when thinking becomes abstract and mediated through objects and signs and so on, like in music or whatever. I think what's often interesting is that the very products that we might produce formulate critiques of the very premises we went to work with, and they kind of show up certain forms of contradiction that the theory might not have apprehended or presumed. And I think, you know, with Les Immatérieux, we get a kind of interesting problem where the idea of the sublime in some of Lyotard's language, like his work on language, is kind of runs up against the methodology of deconstruction that he also proposed in that show. So this kind of idea of the labyrinth and the unraveling of the conditions from inside, you know, is a kind of interiority of experience. And this idea of capital is a kind of complete interiority, as you say, which we enjoy anyway, you know, and enjoy and I mean in the vast sense of enjoyment, in a masochistic sense, what I mean. And so what I think is in this exhibition, it shows the kind of some of the problems in the thinking, but I don't mean that in a sense of that has to be such a negative thing to say. I just mean that it gives us pause for thought across the conditions of like the life of his work, I guess. And it allows us to also think about, let's think about, for example, what you said about the wires and the cables that we do not see. What is it to visualize them? What is it to phenomenalize them or to bring them into being? And what does that do? I mean, is it a Brechtian move, for example? Is it a kind of very, despite everything, is it a very standard Marxian move to bring to light that which is unseen to the eye, you know, to formalize it, manifest it as object material? You know, how do we think about immaterials, ideology, infrastructure, and networks as experiences that still resist objecthood, but can be thought of as events and durations, and still be given to us in thought by actual phenomenal experiences in these systems in their own duration of performance. So I think the show like asks this a lot, and it also asks this by concentrating on history, museology, colliding that with works by Marcel Duchamp, to kind of stage these very particular choreographed antagonisms in different formats of aesthetic production. So I think, yeah, your points are really significant here, because it asks us, you know, how does one actually do this thinking in public, you know, rather than in our heads? Like, soon as we start to mediate our own thoughts, which is what we're doing here, we use ordinary language and we produce pictures and systems, and we invite each other to like try and understand each other by using these common examples or forms of words that we go, well, we understand what those mean, but you know, are they the right ones, and how are we all equally picturing them in the same way? And I think, you know, Lyotard's work is trying to think through that too, and that's why, you know, it brings back certain questions about the subjective, because, you know, whilst we have this claim in the theory of the kind of destruction of particular forms of agency, and this idea of the necessarily and naturalized alienated subject, we also have this reliance upon a figure who navigates and feels and experiences the alienation in very particular ways. And for me, it's very reminiscent of Ernst Junger, this heroism that's like implicated within the experience of the exhibition, this willful sacrifice to the conditions of the techniques of technology. And so I'm not saying Ernst Junger is Lyotard or the one is the other. I'm not saying that at all. But I find that there's a kind of implicit kind of set of conditions. And then as one of you guys was saying, and I'm sorry to forget your names, but you were talking about the alt-right and Ernst Junger. I mean, it also brings back then the political schemas and issues that are like then retrievable in, of course, the way Lyotard's work's been, it kind of implicates certain problems in the political today, right? So for me, it's like a very fascinating complex here that you're kind of referring to with this question of subjectivity, experience, and what it is to manifest infrastructure at the level of the phenomenal.
One question, what you said that as soon as we start thinking publicly, as soon as we start communicating, basically, that then then we'll start using forms of mediation like natural languages or aesthetic representation. But isn't it that that there is no outside of this representational structure, that okay, in our heads we are also just using natural language, and yes. That there is no interiority where there is some kind of semantic intimacy where we intuitively understand ourselves. Like
right.
that one of the most daunting and haunting questions is, do I actually understand what I'm thinking? This is
yeah. I mean, this is alienation, yeah. It's a primarily like the conditions of alienation is that we understand ourselves as all, that there's a kind of alienation deep within that condition that we ourselves are constructed through the necessity of formal mediation. We can see that in what you just said, but also, when you look at, I mean, I'm not gonna do Lacan, but you have that with the construction of the subject in Lacan in the mirror stage, just as much as in other discourses too. So,
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say something, because I would definitely, I mean, I know we're at the end basically, so, but I really wanted to get something off my chest as well. In terms of the exhibition, I would definitely go further and say there is a lot of similarity between Lyotard and Junger, definitely, because I think, and this is maybe also my very pragmatist kind of reading of it, because Ernst Junger might write all what he's writing, but in the end, he's in a cushy position of power with the Nazi party, basically, right? So he is partaking in the structure that he's, to some extent, maybe formalizing as a thing that we can look at and dissect or something like that. And in a sense, I kind of feel like, and if I look at the exhibition, I mean, obviously I can't tell the whole thing, but in terms of producing, as you said, Amanda, producing a site for inhabiting the real as humans, there are also so many kind of presuppositions that go into that like don't attribute fully to what he's actually saying, for example, in the text, I think. So for example, if we think about what kind of structure is that network, so there might not be a central node to that network, but there is Lyotard, there is curation, there is a setup, there is the need to wear audio interfaces, for example, which not all people can do. It might be in a gallery where there's no accessibility. It might be in a suburb where people don't want to go that don't usually go to suburbs. It might not be close to a railway station, which is something that I always like to point out with museums, because a lot of people then couldn't go because some people don't drive. And then there is a sort of network control. Just because there's a network doesn't mean there's no central power, I think, which is something that comes up again and again. And the worst thing, I think, well, or at least my most negative reading, I think, is this very explicit example of how also a lot of the time, I mean, if you read, or if you ever read an interview that the guy from Zaha Hadid Architecture gives, and he talks about how he loves, sorry?
You mean Patrick?
Schumacher?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So he talks a lot about the result arithmetic and things like that, you know, but in the end it's capital basically. So
yeah,
yeah, exactly. So how this force of indeterminacy that you have there, I mean, you can traverse the network any which way you want to, basically, but you have to traverse it. You have this exactly like you said, Amanda, this heroic explorer that you have to become, that those surroundings mediate, that kind of then is a sort of violence anyway. So it's and I mean, as kind of like maybe I don't know, more of like empirically minded in the terms of situated mediation and things like that person, I'm kind of I'm a little surprised by the reading that I'm siding with Adorno a lot more than Lyotard, which is very refreshing. But yeah, it kind of, I mean,
weird, isn't it?
Yeah. I just kind of keep thinking about the, you know, like this is still wrong because it's in the wrong place and there's no escape of that, basically. So
yeah,
that's kind of my thoughts that I had in.
You know what? I had a conversation this morning. I've just left. This is just like a personal thing, but because we're going to finish now anyway. But I had a conversation this morning because I was just with Anna Longo and Inigo Wilkins, and they were staying with me here. And this morning I was like, said, I can't believe that I'm siding with Adorno on over Lyotard. I said exactly the same thing. I was like, so like, whoa, okay, right. I didn't expect that because, you know, in my life in the past, I was very much a Frankfurt School affiliate like 20, 30 years ago. And I hadn't talked about this stuff for quite a while in this kind of way. And I thought, how great would it be to look at this again? And I was saying to those guys, like, I'm actually surprised at myself. So I kind of share that too. And it's kind of funny, but you know what I'd love to do? Because I don't want to just close this discussion off. And I know there's many people here who have not talked or said something. And I think there's more to say about this stuff. So if you guys don't mind, next week, which I hope you can come to, because I know it's Thanksgiving weekend and I would love to see you again, but because I really enjoy this. What I think would be really good is to start off from about here. And maybe like the guys who said, you know, you wanted to talk a bit more about the Adorno and Lyotard, we can do a little tiny bit more, if that's okay. And then we'll like flip over and go to the Badiou and the Gruenbaum. Is that all right?
Yeah, fine with me.
Okay. And maybe we'll keep an eye on the time, and what I'll do is like we'll do like half an hour and then we'll go, okay, we'll move now and go to the Gruenbaum and the Badiou. So it protects the time a bit more. Okay, and next week I'll also remind you guys, because I know that if some of you wanted to write essays, we can talk about that as well. We'll also be able to just chat about what you might want to do if you want to do something. So now I'm just going to like sign off and just to say thank you for your input and your patience with me learning this stuff as well, with learning this platform.
I think Sasha had a point.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. It's just a really short thing. It's just a response to you, Amanda's and Eric's discussion, because I realized you have been circling around the notion of infrastructure and
of what, sorry?
Of infrastructure, and
yes.
I kind of have a feeling that this notion gives a really important dimension of how we think about rationality. And like if we like go with like infrastructure studies and use Brian Larkin to define infrastructure as like the very definition of infrastructure as a political act, and understand infrastructure as something that facilitates the movement, thus we could see maybe like it's really like it's a really a propositional point, and it's just me thinking about this, but maybe we can understand infrastructure as something that basically facilitates the production of rationality, I would say. And like I kind of side with this I suppose on this with technology studies, I would say. So I would really like appreciate people who are actually doing the stuff to answer me. But yeah, just a really short note.
Well, Sasha, would it be possible that next week when we begin that you ask that question?
Yeah.
And if the people who have a response to that question like are thinking about it now, and then maybe that could be like a first just a little foray before we did the presentations on the new text, like next week. Maybe we could start with your question.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
I think so too.
Sorry. Could you write up the question in the classroom maybe? Then
yeah, I certainly can. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that would be a lovely place to start, and allow us just to kind of unravel this a little bit more before we feel like we've got somewhere with it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go now, but thank you to everyone for, like I say, your patience and your involvement, and hopefully see you next week.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.